Done a lot to coordinate with search and rescue and really help out in making those connections and getting those things lined up. She was actually drove me out to the incident on April 2nd at Indian Canyon, and so she was part of that, and on scene as well. And then I want to have give a special thanks, very, very special thanks to Kasia Maximovich. So ultimately, we wouldn't be here at this event if it wasn't for her. This was really her idea, and she has really been the one to organize this and plan this and make sure that it, is happening and running smoothly. It also happens to be her birthday on Saturday, and so I have a little gift for her that I wanted to give at this presentation in front of everybody. If I can get it. All right, so, oh gosh. All right, so, Kasia, here you go. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
And if you notice on the back, it's actually signed by quite a few people in the community, and so welcome her to the ice climbing community. She, I think we met in Maple Canyon last year climbing. I think it was your first season ice climbing, right? Second season ice climbing, so she's kind of new to the sport. So welcome her into the community. So thank you again, Kasia. Really appreciate everything you've done. Okay, so sorry, let's get into it. We have an awesome panel tonight. So we've got Doug Heinrich from Black Diamond. We've got Jackson Yip, who happens to be a really, really smart guy. We've got, of course, Will Gadd joining us remotely from Canada. Very appreciative that he's been able to participate in this. And we've got Jeff Rose from Utah County Search and Rescue, who actually, it is his birthday today. So happy birthday, Jeff. And thank you for spending some time with us today. So the format that we're going to go through is we're going to give some very quick presentations from each of the panelists. We'll have the opportunity for any of the panelists to kind of add to those. And then what we'll do is we'll open it up to Q&A as we get towards the end of those presentations. So again, thanks everybody for coming, and let's all try to stay really safe as much as we can this season. So Tim, slide. Okay. Anything to add, Doug? Awesome. Oh. Okay. All right. Hopefully we can move the slide. Oh. Okay, well, while they're working on that, what I wanted to do is really kind of talk about the purpose of tonight real quick. So we're seeing, of course, the ultimate goal is to not have to use the services of search and rescue and keep us all fairly safe. Ice climbing is actually quite a dangerous sport. It can be done, you can do things to really mitigate the safety and to make it as safe as possible, but there's always danger. Really, the only safe way to ice climb is to just not ice climb. But none of us are going to do that, right? We're all going to go out and ice climb. So we want to look at some things to really mitigate that. And what I've noticed over the years, I've kind of evolved in terms of my approach to safety, mindset, how I evaluate climbs, the risk factors and the risk levels and those types of things. And that's come from just seeing more and more, incidents and things happen. And what we're really seeing, I think, now is we're getting a lot more people joining the community and starting the sport of ice climbing, which is awesome. We want to encourage that. But as more people are coming into the sport, we're seeing people approach it from, coming from the gyms, coming from sport climbing, those types of things, and not necessarily having the depth of experience on the medium. And ice really is a unique animal. There's so many factors that go into that. And we're seeing a lot of strong climbers, in this room tonight. And, some of the things I think that we may not always realize or think about is ultimately, plug your ears, kids, the ice doesn't really give a shit how strong you are. If a pillar is going to break, it doesn't care how strong you are. If an avalanche is going to come down, on top of you, it doesn't, that doesn't matter how strong you are. And so really, we really need to be approaching this from a mindset of, good, we're strong, and it's good to do that, and we want to use that strength to be able to climb and lead safely and efficiently. But you can't just rely on that. We really need to be evaluating pillars and ice conditions and avalanche conditions and these things, a bit more in depth, I think. So this is some scenes from Tim's accident. You can see Tim there. So Tim fell on a climb called Finger of Fate, and some other things that we kind of have noticed a little bit is, or I'm going to talk, Tim, a little bit about your specific accident, if that's okay. So Tim's a great climber. He's very experienced, and this is the thing, is we've seen some accidents with very experienced people. Tim really progressed last season. The first part of the season started getting a lot more, a lot stronger and dialed in, and was actually doing really, really well. Got on a climb called Finger of Fate, and here's where I'm going to jump around on my slides here briefly to try to get through this efficiently. But in kind of decision-making process and looking at that, Tim approached the climb. The ice was garbage that day, absolute garbage. He approaches the climb. Somebody had set up or was at the top and offered to let him top rope it, but Tim wanted to lead, which was great. So Tim opted to lead that day. Ultimately, got up on the ice, realized how bad it was. The top of Finger of Fate kind of ramps off and starts to get a bit easier. And so I think, you got to that point and kind of relaxed a little bit. Foot blew off, the ice detached from the rock, foot blew off. He took a pretty good fall, ripped a screw out, and ultimately got caught by the other screw, but got pretty banged up in the process. So, the lesson there, I look at that in terms of sometimes take the top rope, right? So look at those conditions when you've got other people that really kind of tell you how bad something might be. Really take that into account. And then the other thing in that particular accident was Tim put put a 10 centimeter screw in some really crappy ice and knew it was bad, but rather than taking the time to find maybe a better placement or reinforce that, being on easier terrain, he decided to just go for it. And ultimately that turned out the way that it did. So we want to avoid that. Tim, let's hit the next slide. Okay, again, we talked a little bit about search and rescue support and what we're doing there. So these are some scenes from that training that we did on Stairway, which was a great resource. Next slide. Also, I wanted to mention really quick other ways. We're doing everything we can to support SAR, and the efforts that we're doing go right directly to the SAR team. I'm likely going to be handing gear to Duchesne County tonight and letting them take that, which is fantastic. The SAR card is another option. Just so you guys know, anybody in Utah, you don't have to have any type of card or insurance or anything along those lines. Search and rescue is going to come for you one way or another. But this is a way to support SAR as well, to buy that card, and that money does ultimately go to some of the smaller teams and things like that. So hit that. Okay. Ice climbing is inherently dangerous. I wanted to show this slide because this is something I think not a lot of people really realize. So this is Bridalveil Falls right here, and this is the slide path above it. It's enormous. This is the Fang right here. Again, big slide gully above that. Last season, there's a couple people that I know are here right now. We're climbing about 8 or 10 hours prior to that massive slide in Bridalveil last year. And so really knowing the terrain and knowing what's above you is one of the critical things as we go through this. Tim? Again, other hazards and things like that. You can see this crack right here. This entire chunk outlined in red fell off. This is a climb. This pillar cracked. Actually, I was on this with Doug Konsicki. It cracked and settled about 2 inches. And so, these types of things can happen. I'm really excited for Jackson's discussion a little bit later as we talk about some of the mechanics and physics that go into that. So, Tim, next slide. Safety mindset. I wanted to touch on this because this is another thing where I think a lot of times, especially people with a lot of experience, we go into some of these areas looking at it like, I've done this climb before, it's only a WI3 or WI4 or something along those lines. This is Mark Miller. You can see his memorial in Uray. I knew Mark, good dude. He fell off a WI3 and was killed, unfortunately. So an easy climb, done it multiple times before, was just relaxed and kind of a little bit again, just felt like he was fine. And, you never know when something along those lines can happen. So, even those of us in the room that have climbed a lot of ice and are fairly experienced, we really need to be taking a look at these things, because I think a lot of times, we go into that thinking, it's not going to happen to me, or, this is easier than what I'm capable of, and those types of things. So really kind of pay attention to that. Next slide, Tim. Okay, so partnering and partnership, group dynamics, crowds, some of these things really kind of come into play in terms of deciding whether or not to climb. So I use this picture because this particular day I learned a really good lesson on partner dynamics. Happened to be 3 of us that day. One person was very uncomfortable with this particular climb and the way that it was set up. Ultimately, I evaluated it and decided I wanted to climb it, and so the second person and I climbed it, and that third partner was not very pleased with that, and I didn't respect that, and that was a lesson that I learned, and so really kind of understanding when people are comfortable, you can put somebody else in danger if you're not kind of taking that into account, and so that's why I use this particular image on that. Tim? Again, we're seeing a lot of crowds, and we're seeing a lot of people join this sport. Here's a couple pictures of Stairway, and I don't know what this climb is. Does anybody know what this climb is? That's a bit of an inside joke. If you're in the ice climbing forum on Facebook, you might get it. But so as we see more and more people, areas like this, that's one of the areas, or one of the reasons we're going to have a lot of accidents is ice fall and, climbing underneath others. So really, this type of thing, you've got to be very, very careful. Stairway, the apron is a great place for beginners to learn to ice climb and those kinds of things, but there's a lot of terrain above that. I know Doug's going to talk a little bit more about that as well. So really understanding how to navigate situations where there's a lot of people and those types of things is something that really should kind of take into account. Okay, Tim? In terms of decision making, here's 2 contrasting slides. So this is the 5th pitch on Stairway. I decided to climb this pitch. It was the skinniest I've ever climbed it, and it took me probably about an hour to decide whether or not I was going to do it. And one of the things in terms of partnerships is I was up there with Tuttle, and when you develop a really good partnership with somebody, you can kind of read them. And so I was actually reading Tuttle as much as I was reading the ice in terms of his reaction, because when we got there, it was actually his pitch to lead, and he didn't want to do it. And that shocked me. I was like, "Ooh, well, it looked really cool. What am I missing?" And so I really studied him, and ultimately he said, it's probably 50-50. And in a lot of cases, unfortunately, when we get in these scenarios, it kind of is 50-50, and you don't know until you know. Either it comes down on you or it doesn't, and you live. I look back on that, and that was one that maybe I should have made a different decision. Obviously, it turned out, but could have made a different decision on that day. This is Get Whacked in Maple. This is a day I did make a different decision. So right about here, everything above this had about a foot and a half gap between the ice and the rock. And it was easy. It was lower angle. The ice was plastic. It was just easy swings and easy terrain, and I could have easily gotten up that, but it wasn't worth it. And so I made the call not to do it. And that's one of the things. These are a few years apart, and again, just kind of learning and seeing a lot of accidents and some of those kinds of things has really kind of helped me take a different look at it. But okay, Tim, next slide. All right, and this is where we're going to get into Doug's, but Doug's part of the conversation, but ultimately the other thing I wanted to kind of say, and I know Doug's going to talk a little bit more about this, is leading. So I actually learned this from Doug when I was 17, 16, however old I was at the time, and it just always stuck with me. And so I've climbed, I haven't climbed as much ice as Doug or as long as Doug has, but I've been ice climbing for about 25 years, and in that 25-year period of time, I've never fallen on a screw on lead. I've fallen on mixed climbs, on bolts and things like that, but I've never fallen on a screw. And the reason is because he told me early on, when you get to the base of a climb, if you look up at it and you're not 100% confident that you can climb it without falling, don't do it. Take a different, come back a different day or whatever it is. If you're not feeling good or the ice doesn't look right or, any of those little things, if you aren't confident that you're going to do it. Now, it doesn't mean you're not going to fall, but it just means that you've got to be, able to really look at it and identify that you're on, so that we're not looking at situations where we want to project ice. You don't want to fall ice climbing, even in short falls, even in top rope falls. If you catch a crampon or something like that, you can get really injured. And so we want to be very, very careful. And so really, that's been a great approach. I really appreciate that, Doug. So any questions from the panel at this point, or any other thoughts from you guys? Cool. Awesome. Well, let's turn it over to Doug Heinrich, everybody. All right.
Which one? All right. Well, first off, I'm super psyched to see this many people here. So I'm actually, you never know how these things are going to turn out. So I have like a lifetime of information I wish I could tell you in like 7 minutes, but I can't. And so I'm wide open. I'm somewhat invisible as far as social media and stuff, but you can always track me down at BD, and I'm happy to chat with you anytime. I've spent a lot of my career, my professional career, working for Black Diamond, and really a lot of it's been developing new tools, and Will's been on our team forever. So, we've really been involved in basically the evolution of ice climbing equipment, trying to make it easier and safer. And Will's been a big part of this as well. So this is our new tool that will be coming out next year. It's called the Hydra. So it's the next level leashless tool, and no one climbs. Actually, is there anyone that climbs with leashes? Not umbilical cords, but is there anyone that climbs with leashes? Thank God. So I'm happy to see that. But there was a pretty big evolution from the shape of tools, climbing with leashes, going leashless, and really that's taken over, roughly 20 years to evolve the sport. Ice screws have improved immensely. Brian Smoot's in the audience, and I've had the good fortune having ice climb I'm dating myself, for 40 years, and gone through that evolution with the gear, so it's a lot easier. It's a lot safer than it used to be. As far as like just fundamental tips, and Dustin hit this, is I had the good fortune to climb with Mug Stump, which, has anyone heard of Mug Stump in the audience? So he was my mentor, and I had the good fortune of climbing. Ice climbing is really about navigating the terrain and staying safe. And I also think that you always want to, so we've got a couple of shots of Stairway here, and Stairway is the most popular route around besides the icicle. But the one thing I want to point out is there's a lot of terrain up there, and there's a lot of crappy rock. And so Jackson will talk a little bit more about conditions, but if it's warm, water starts moving and rocks start falling. So you're not necessarily safe at the base of the apron. So Stairway is a big route. Scott Adamson, myself, Chris Harmston did the first mixed scent, which went all the way to the top of the buttress, and it has like a bunch of M8 and 1M9 pitch. We actually farmed that, so it doesn't really come in unless it's farmed, and I've been too lazy and working too much to go farm it again. But this is kind of like the standard route here. Let's hit the next slide. But I want to point out one pitch in particular that's really dangerous, and it's the fifth pitch of Stairway. And Brian's in the audience, but this is what I would consider, it's been forming further right this year, and it doesn't really, when you say Brian, it's been forming right for the last 5 or 6 years, and so it doesn't connect very well. And Jackson will talk about the weakness, but this particular pitch, I've seen it in the trail like down by the river. So when it comes off, we're talking tons of ice that can travel all the way down the whole route. And literally, like, I've seen chunks of ice, this big down on the paved path. So you have to be really aware. Sorry, but you can see, like, the fifth pitch, you probably shouldn't climb it when it looks like this. Does that make sense? Someone may be able to climb it, but you're really rolling the dice, and it's mainly because it doesn't connect very well up here. And Jackson will get into the sort of physics of this stuff. So the main thing that I want to impress upon you guys is, I wish, we don't have time for this to be somewhat of a technique thing. I think the whole point of this discussion is staying safe. And I can say of the thousands of pitches that I've done, I can't tell you how many that I've backed off or decided not to do it. And sometimes I've spent a lot of money to go to Canada and go to certain climbs and hiked a long ways, and then it's not climbable, or it's not safe enough. And now that I'm old and gray hair and everything, I can say that you always want to make that decision to climb another day, right? So it's just not really worth betting the ranch on a pillar or an ice climb that you don't think is safe, because it'll come back or it'll be there again. And so I always sort of do this assessment, and I'm fairly linear in the way I think, because that's I'm the head of design and development and at Black Diamond, and we're pretty linear in the way we think. But I am always just thinking about, and I don't want to sound macabre, but I just think worst case scenario. So if I'm climbing with this fellow over here and the fifth pitch breaks, what's going to happen? Well, number one, we're going to send a shitload of ice down the route. So if anyone's below us, we could be responsible for killing someone. So number one, I don't want that on my conscience, and I don't think you do either. And obviously we don't want to kill anyone. But then if I do break the pillar or something happens, what's going to happen to my belayer? So I always want to put my belayer in the safest place I can possibly put them. And which one is it? Is it post-nasal? Is that the weird little pillar that comes in once in a while? That pillar doesn't come in very often, and it's pretty sketchy. And unfortunately, there is no safe place for the belayer there, because the rock's so shitty you can't even put a bolt in. So every time I've done that thing, I've been like, damn, I better not blow it, because I'm going to get hurt and my belayer's going to get hurt. So I'm always thinking about this guy over here and saying, okay, I want him or her to be in the most protected place I can possibly put them. I'm not going to climb above you. I'm going to diagonal away from you, so if I'm sending ice down, it's not going to hit you. Stairway and the icicle are really kind of dicey in a way, because people will come climb below you, and then you have this weird existential crisis, right? Because you're like, well, fuck, I'm on this thing. Sorry for the language, but I'm on this thing, and what do I do? Because in some days it's really brittle, and you can actually send stuff down the route even though you're not trying, and the person below you's decided to get on the route. So that puts the people above you in a really weird position, because if you're coming up below them, even if you're faster than they are and you pass them, then you've just reversed the roles, and now you can start dropping ice on them. So it's kind of a tricky thing when routes get crowded, and the icicle absolutely is the most crowded route out there. The beauty of Stairway is it has a little bit of a filtering effect, because it just gets harder the higher you go, and you can have a couple parties on it and climb safely as long as you're somewhat coordinated. So I guess, again, I have a lifetime of knowledge to kind of give you guys. I wish I had more time, but like I said, you can get hold of me at Black Diamond any time you want. I'm happy. We're happy to have you come over. We'll break some screws for you. We'll show you sort of the mechanics of the tools. But at the end of the day, I think the key thing is just make sure that you're always very conscious of everything that's going on, right? Like, you almost have to have this point of view, like, okay, I'm showing up at the icicle, great, no one's above me. What are the snow conditions? What are the avalanche conditions? What is the descent like? You kind of have to take all this into consideration. And now with, there's a lot of forums, and I wouldn't always trust the forums, because sometimes I'll see, stairways falling down, and then I go down there the next day and it's totally fine. So, you kind of have to have a trusted group of people that are giving you what you consider good information, right? And then the other thing is really watch temperatures. Number one rule, and a really good friend of mine got killed because of this, and he got killed on the Fang. Brutal accident. He was actually at the belay at the top. A huge avalanche came down, It ripped him off this gigantic tree and took him all the way down the route, and it pulled his friend, his belayer, all the way up through all the protection, like ripping screws going up as he was being taken down. And luckily Thad didn't get killed, but it was raining in Provo, and there was over 100 inches of snow above it. So absolutely do not go ice climbing when it's raining. Like, that is like bad news. Maybe you could pull it off in Maple because there's not a lot of objective hazard, but to me, that is the number one rule, is you've got to pay attention to the temperatures, because Utah's right on the line, and I wish our ice climbs were a couple thousand feet higher, because a lot of days we're right on the line of it being safe or not. Like, when you go to Canada, it's pretty predictable. They do get some Chinooks that roll through, but as a general rule, it's cold. If you go to North Conway or back east, it's typically cold, or, you know, eastern Canada. But really, I'd say temperature is probably the number one factor, and Jackson will really kind of hit that harder with the dynamics that creates within the ice structures themselves. Again, I have so much information I can give you, but in a short time, I would just say find mentors, follow a lot, always take the conservative way out. I could get into leading technique a little bit more. I am seeing people place a lot more screws than I used to, which is great. Like, in the old days, we could really only place 6 screws in a 200-foot pitch because it was too much of a pain in the ass. And now most people are placing 12 screws, so that's good. My advice on putting screws in is always put them in the easy places. Don't necessarily try to put them in the hard places, because you're just going to get pumped and it's hard to put them in. So you have to be fairly crafty about the way you're going up. If you say, hey, if I can get to this point, I see a stance, there's a good foothold, it's a better place to fire in the screw than hanging out trying to get really pumped and it taking you time to put screws in. And I personally have gotten a lot better because, you know, I've soloed Stairway a bunch and all that, but I'm really conscious now of, like, when it eases off, I put a screw in. Every time you're going up over a bulge, put a screw in before you do that move, because that's most likely where you will make a mistake and fall, because it's a little awkward for your feet when you're going over bulges. So I would say, you know, protect the easy parts, make sure you're competent enough to climb the hard parts. That doesn't mean you can't put a screw in, and I personally don't put any screws in pillars that I don't trust. Like, and that kind of goes back to Dustin's point. Like, I would rather, you know, take my chances of hitting the ground than taking the pillar down with me, if that makes sense. Because if that pillar breaks and you're attached to it with your rope, that's a whole nother magnitude of force that's happening. And, you know, we've had a fatality on Frankenchrist for that exact reason, as there was like 8 screws in that pillar and the thing broke, and that the guy, you know, was attached to that ice and it went all the way to the bottom. So I don't want this to sound super macabre, because, you know, I've been climbing forever and I've had a couple accidents in my whole climbing career, and they both have been pilot error. I mean, I got hurt on the icicle because I was just being a total idiot. And, you know, it's like the easiest route around, right? So to Dustin's point, like, sometimes when you let your guard down and you think, oh, this is casual, that's when you get hurt. So anyway, I kind of want this to be a pep talk, but, you know, ice climbing's dangerous. You can do it safely. You just have to be very, very aware when you're out there of what's going on. So anyway, that's kind of what I have. Turn it over to Jackson.
Awesome. Actually, thanks, Doug. Thank you very much. Yeah, Doug's been a good mentor over the years, and really appreciate his perspective on these things. So, okay, so now we are going to turn it over to Will Gadd from Canada. So thank you again, Will, for joining us.
We'll go for it. So I'm going to hit kind of 3 general areas: why ice climbs fail, and surviving that, and developing your own model, which is what this is all about. Like Doug said, you've got to have your own kind of model of how ice climbing works, and it will get better and better with time and input. And what I say tonight may well be wrong. So you know, take it for what it's worth, and it's worked for me, but it's really about your model and your understanding and making that better. So here we go. In the kind of causes of serious ice climbing accidents I've seen over the last 40 years of doing this sport, these are kind of the top three. Generally, it's human error. Most likely somebody pitches off, and then it's avalanches, and then surprisingly, it's the ice climb breaks. That does happen, but it's the first two that tend to kill or really mess more people up than the last one.
So don't fall off. That's my best advice. I did a whole series of videos with BD on how not to fall off. So check those out. Get truck placements and really good feet, and that'll take care of most of that. Avalanche stuff, you've got great forecasting there in the Wasatch. Every day I read the avalanche report before I go out in the morning, even for areas that I'm not going to. Like I'm reading it for the Wasatch most days. I'm reading it for the Northeast most days. If I'm going to go to Europe in a couple of weeks, I'm reading up. You got to know that. But I'm going to focus on ice climbs breaking and failing and why that happens. So it breaks down pretty simply. I'm going to start with normal, so-called normal ice climbs, where there's like a chunk of rock and a piece of ice that goes onto it. And this is the Weeping Wall, which is like the OG classic ice route here in the Canadian Rockies. And this is early season. So what's happened is it's gotten below freezing, there's running water, and there's not enough sun on this thing anymore, and ice starts forming. But the key piece of information you need to kind of figure out is how cold was the rock when this ice started forming? Because if the rock's not frozen, then the bond between the rock and the ice is no good. And this is why a lot of the climbs in the southeast tend to fall down. So if we get a cold period and then the ice starts really forming up, generally there's a good bond and things are pretty safe. But if the rock is warm and the air temperature drops, then you end up with this ice layer on top that isn't very solid and is prone to breaking off. So you got to think about that attachment between the ice and the rock. It's not the stability of the ice that matters. It's the stability, that bond between the ice and the rock, that really matters. And then this is later in the season on Weeping Wall. Now things are starting to kind of like really fill in and form up. And it gets massive in there. It's by the end of the season, that's kind of what it looks like. It's just this giant chunk of ice. It's really well bonded to the rock underneath it. And it's going to take like a major earthquake to knock that thing off. It's really, really attached. But if there's starting to be water around the edges of it, or as Doug said, that's a super important point. If it's starting to rain, a big piece of ice like this is pretty resilient. It's not going to have much of an impact right away. But a smaller piece of ice, something thin, water has a tremendous amount more latent heat at 0 degrees than like snow does. Warm snow, relatively warm snow, doesn't bother me. If it's even raining a bit and the ice is thin, then I'm going to be out of there pretty quickly. And you've probably seen videos of people climbing and the ice delaminating. Generally, that's very thin ice with poor attachment to a rock surface. It's not frozen well. But here you're good to go. This is Zion. Climbed there last year with Andy Knight and a couple other just great people. This is a classic place where the ground is not very well frozen. It's just not. It's transitory freezing, and the ice forms on top of it, but it's really not very well attached, and you've got to take real care here or it'll bite you. This ice is green, meaning it's very high quality, or blue. It hasn't sublimated. Sublimation is just what happens to ice cubes in your freezer. They lose water, just like crystals in the snowpack at the base. It's the same process of sublimation on ice climbs. This one's still pretty green. It's tucked into a corner. It's structurally good, but I'm always suspect in relatively warm areas of that attachment between the rock and the ice. That's what it's all about. And here it's probably still okay, but on the sides, I'm always looking for water or detaching things on the sides. This is Maple Canyon in Utah last winter. Again, another place where the temperature fluctuates radically. And now we're starting to get a little bit more interesting ice climbing that's detached. And you can see I put my screw in down at the bottom before it leaves the rock. Like generally it's the hanging pieces that break. And then as Doug said, and that was awesome, Doug, I don't put gear into anything free hanging, because if it does break, I don't want to be tied to it. It's just It's not worth it. If you can't climb it without gear, then honestly, you shouldn't be climbing it. You're making a decision to solo it. But again, this is an area where that rock behind the ice is probably not super well frozen. It's probably only frozen in 2 or 3 inches. So even a temperature swing of 24 or 48 hours is going to warm that rock up, and that's going to break the bond down. And then things get weirder and weirder. This is in China, and these are like, literally 10 to 20 foot petals of ice. All that's holding them on is their bond to the rock. They're cantilevered out like huge distances. But in this area, it's consistently -5 Celsius, and I don't know what that is in American, like 22, something like that. It's that temperature all the time, and everything is very, very well bonded up. There's no water on the surface of the rock anywhere in this amphitheater, and they might just break off, and I'm going to get into that as we move into like the more radical forms here. But overall, this is probably still okay from just an ice being attached to the rock really well perspective. It's probably pretty good. And this is the Christmas tree in China, and now we're starting to blur things. There's pillars on this, so standing features of ice. There's icicles. Things are getting pretty complicated in this zone, and this is what most kind of grade 6 ice climbing starts to look like. It's getting more and more toward that freestanding, free-hanging zone of ice climbing, and not just relying on attachment to the actual rock under the ice. So that covers kind of the normal ice climbing section, and this is how I look at it. It's like, what was the temperature when the ice formed? Not what the temperature is now, but what was it when it formed, and how cold it had been before that, and how frozen up is that rock. It's like, in Canada, they have to put utilities 6 feet down in the ground because that's the freeze line. In Utah, it's probably like 24 inches. It's you want that really good frozen terrain, and then if it isn't really frozen, then it's sketchy. Has the ice sublimated? A lot of climbs that are freeze thaw, they form and then they lose mass. The ice gets weaker and weaker. It gets more and more white as time goes on, and then eventually it usually delaminates off the frozen rock underneath it, just from losing all that mass and starting to either contract or expand depending on the temperature in a minute. And then again, just Doug mentioned this, but if I'm in the Northeast and it starts raining and I'm on a 2-inch thick piece of ice, I'm out of there pretty quick. That warm water has huge cutting impacts on relatively thin ice. In Canada, if it starts sprinkling and it's been -20, Celsius for a week, I'm not too concerned about it. I don't like it because it affects the snowpack. And again, your knowledge and all of this goes together. It's like, what happens to snowpacks when you get huge temperature gradients is the same thing that causes ice sublimation. And when you get added load in the form of rain on a snowpack, it's the same sort of problem that you get with ice when it's raining. Like, your ability to understand the mountains is what it's all about. And then I do look at what the temperature's been for the last 48 hours or so, but big temperature swings that are warm don't freak me out too much. It takes a lot of heat to get through that ice to the frozen rock and then unfreeze that rock and unfreeze that ice. I'm not super concerned in terms of ice. I'm more concerned in terms of snowpack for when temperatures start really going up, but we'll get into that in a minute. And then, the fastest indicator, if there's a lot of water on the rock around the ice, that's a pretty good clue that things are starting to get western, and it may be a good time to leave, especially if you're in avalanche terrain. That's again a pretty big clue that things are going on. So icicles, this is like anything that's not bonded to the rock for the duration of its kind of length. We went over the weeping wall, that's all pretty bonded mostly. Now we're moving into like icicles, and here's El Classic icicle. This is Guy Lacelle in Pont Rouge in Canada a few years ago. This is your classic icicle. And I used to look at these and think, well, it's attached at the base, it's attached to the top, it's pretty good to go. And maybe not good to go, but it's somewhat sane. What I've come to realize over time is that these things are hanging. The base does very, very little until it's very large. This is a hanging piece of ice. And there's a lot of routes like this, like Curtain Col in the Canadian Rockies. Every year this little pillar forms, and then it breaks off into a curtain, and it shatters all the way across that whole curtain up there. But you can see the base on this thing is already forming. It's pretty large, but it's still really thin for the length of it. And to me, this thing is probably still hanging. So it breaks, and there's the curtain with somebody on it climbing out there. That happens every year without fail. And it breaks until the base gets big enough to actually support the column. Pillars aren't like hanging on at the top. They're standing on their bases. And if they're not standing on their bases relatively solidly, then they are under huge tension from all that weight hanging off the attachment point at the top. And they're gonna break. And just a couple of slides to illustrate this. This is a super classic, like grade 3 or something like that in Canada, called Panther Falls. There's sick roots behind this in the Cineplex. But until a pillar has a crack across it and it's released that strain of all the ice hanging off the attachment point, it's quite dangerous. So if you look more closely at this thing, that curtain has actually fractured all the way across it. And to me, that's a really good sign that it's now standing on the base versus hanging off the attachment point. And there's flowing water here, so that crack has totally cemented itself back together in there, and it's good to go. When I first started ice climbing, I saw these and I was like, scary, scary. And now I'm like, oh, that's a good sign. That means that there's been strain relief and it's all standing on its base. And this is just kind of cool. That's that same climb from the backside, and you can see how that fracture has run all the way across the whole pillar. So just going back to the two, there's the front of it, and you can see those cracks. And then looking at the same climb, I don't know if it's the same season or not, but pretty close to it, and you can see that crack cruising all the way across the back of it. That's a good sign. Pillars stand, and if they aren't standing, then they're hanging, and they're very prone to breaking. And that just does not work out well if you're climbing on them. I'm just going to show one quick video. Normally it'd have audio, but it doesn't. When I first started ice climbing, or even relatively recently, I was like 99% certain that things were good in terms of jumping on either an icicle or a standing really skinny pillar. And then I climbed like several hundred of them, and I started to get bad outcomes. And this is kind of a classic bad outcome here. I don't think you guys can hear the audio, but I've just spent like 20 minutes organizing my rope so that if it does break, it's not going to catch on this thing and kill me, and it breaks. The other thing that's going on here is my belayer, who is Pete. You can see his white helmet there. He was kind of going to stand underneath this at the start, and being the paranoid guy that I am, I'm like, no, man, let's move you over here. We'll tie you down. I think we pounded his ice tools into the crack so that when it broke, it didn't kill him. And that's a key thing. Anytime there's like a pillar or a dangling piece of ice or a curtain, you have to assume that at some point it's going to break. It might not break today. You might get 99 of them before that 1 in 100 event occurs. But we have to keep our ropes organized so that if it breaks, it doesn't kill us. And it also doesn't take out our belayers and the rest of the team. So when I first started ice climbing, we didn't really anchor the belayer. We just sort of stood there at the base of the ice route. Now we tend to anchor the belayer well off to the side of the route, because when these things break, the belayer gets sucked into them, and then they're in the impact zone too. So that may mean anchoring the belayer like 30 feet out to the side on free hanging, freestanding, however you want to look at it, ice features. That's relatively new in the last 5 years, and it's really, really important. It's not how we looked at it before. And there's dozens or hundreds of thousands of photos of me not doing this. Again, we learn, we get better. So anchor the belayer out to the side, and then make sure the rope is running so that when that curtain breaks, it doesn't come down the rope at you and squeegee you. A friend of mine, Sue Knott, spent a bunch of time in the hospital when she got squeegeed when a curtain in Vail broke and came down the rope onto her. You got to organize your rope so that you don't get squeegeed, and then organize the belayer so that they don't get smacked by the falling pillar. And I know some of you were involved in that accident with Meg. I don't know the situation there, but I'm so sorry that happened to you. That's just really obviously shitty thing, and I feel for you, and yeah, I'm with you. What I'm saying today is maybe different knowledge or something, but I absolutely know that everybody was doing their best that day, and I'm with you fully. So things we can learn from that. I'm just going to run this through, just things to have in your brain. Unless that icicle is standing, it's hanging and it can break. So you don't want to be putting gear into it. You want to watch for that crack. Icicles almost always break at their attachment points. I don't know how many videos I've seen of people like being really careful at the bottom, and then they get close to where the ice and the rock meet, and they start swinging hard. The thing breaks, and they go for a ride. And so just assume that if it's going to break, it's actually going to break very close to that attachment point, as it did in the video I show you. And if it doesn't have that fracture line yet, it's hanging, and you need to approach it as an icicle, not a pillar. And you've got to watch that base. It's all about the base. I've been surprised a few times that way and had pillars settle on me that weren't fractured already. Fracture lines are good. I just said that. I won't cover that again. Yeah, as Doug said, don't put gear into freestanding ice unless it's so big that it just doesn't matter. But I often see people putting like screws into little skinny features, and they don't know any better, right? They don't know that that's dangerous, so they're not stupid. But it pains me to see that, because I know the outcome when that happens. And then the debris goes a long way horizontally. And if you're just standing to the side and you're not anchored off to the side, you will get sucked into the debris when these things break, and it will be bad. I just said that. And then I already covered this, but just set the rope so that you don't get squeegeed. And curtains can fracture a really long way horizontally. They're under tension, and there's some interesting science on this that maybe Jackson will get into. I won't go into that. I've been researching that a bunch lately. The other thing to be really aware of that I didn't understand at first, 30 years ago, most big free hanging and freestanding icicles break when the temperature drops. And there seems to be a crucial temperature threshold for a couple different reasons at around minus 20 Celsius. And I don't know what that is in American, like minus 15 or something. I don't know exactly. But when you get that big temperature swing, you get different strain ratios within these free hanging and freestanding features, and they break. So temperature swings to the warm side don't usually blow the big pieces off. They can. I've seen that happen too. But like 95% of the time, it's falling temperatures that break this stuff. And I've been scared a couple times out of that. So if it gets cold, you won't find many experienced climbers in the Rockies here in Canada going ice climbing, because stuff starts breaking and fracturing. It's like we're looking for things that are not based on pillars, but they're based on a nice frozen on rock and ice. Take care of higher water volume. I'm going to show you a picture of that. But, these big volume climbs like the Chute Montmorency in Quebec and some of the other ones I've done, they form ice on the sides over the running water, and then the water changes pass, and it breaks that ice off. So high volume stuff scares me, generally speaking. This is Helmkin Falls. I put this in there because a lot of people are going there, but you're inventing a new sport when you go there. Like all the time, it's full on and really cool. If anybody wants more info, email me or DM me or whatever, and I'm very stoked to talk about it. But you're definitely outside the box when you go to Helmkin. This is just an example. That whole blue area there ripped out. We were trying to climb that thing, and we just couldn't do it directly underneath any of these things. They're breaking off continuously, and you just have to assume that. You've got to be on rock or on ice that's bonded to rock underneath it, or you're super exposed, and it's not so good. A couple of kind of last things here. We've changed our philosophy in the Rockies. I used to not carry ice gear or carry avalanche gear when climbing an avalanche terrain in the Rockies. I was like, there's no point. If the slide comes down, I'm dead anyhow. And then what I kind of came to the realization on is that it's not just about me. It's also about the people that come looking for me. We've had some really horrific situations where ice climbers have been buried quite deeply in the Canadian Rockies and elsewhere. And we haven't been able to dig them out. Puts the rescue crew in huge danger. So, at least carry Reco. It weighs nothing. You get found. And there have been some live recoveries with Reco, but for me, it's more about just reducing the risk to the rescue team. These are my friends, they're your friends. Let's make their job easier. And there have been some interesting recoveries with avalanche gear and ice climbing. I don't want to go into that, but basically, I at least
if you went skiing in avalanche terrain and you didn't bring your avalanche gear, everybody would be like, what are you, an idiot? But in ice climbing, it's like, oh, we're going in avalanche terrain, but we're not bringing avalanche gear. And I guess for me, it's kind of come around to the point where if it's above threshold to slide, I bring avalanche gear. And then bring comms. I have, never seen anybody with a broken femur say, I am an alpine purist. Don't call the rescue. It's like you want the machine and the people there as fast as possible. So really bluntly, if you're climbing without comms, if there's not cell service, then you really do need an in-reach. It can make a huge difference. We got to get people to the hospital as fast as possible. And if you don't have that, like drink less beer, drink less Starbucks, get an in-reach. It's worth it. And then, finally have a plan for when things go sideways, because if you're out there a lot, you're going to have 99% of your days are going to be awesome. But things will go sideways. That is what happens. It's not a fluke. This is an expected outcome of doing our sport. And having comms and an understanding of different systems to respond and how to make that easier on yourself and your partner and rescuers, that can save lives. So pretty keen on that. This, I'm not going to read all of it, but it's the Ice Climbers Responsibility Code, and most of this Doug covered, like, don't climb underneath other people. Ice falls down. That's normal. If you get hit with ice climbing, it is your own fault. It's like you don't need to yell ice when you're ice climbing, because it's like, that's expected. Ice is going to fall down. It's like yelling puck in a hockey game. It's like, no shit. That's what we're here to do. So if you climb underneath other people, you will get hit. And it's, I'm not going to climb in like a light and delicate way because there's people underneath me. It's like, you do that, you need to expect to get hit, unfortunately. Bring the gear. We've been through the rest of this, and I'm going to berate this. And that is all finally, just a note, everybody's like, well, the ice broke. It's like, we're out there, and we have to own what we're doing out there. And it's not a fluke generally. We lacked understanding about this environment, and I could talk about this endlessly and do in some of my other shows, so I'm not going there. But we've got to take pretty radical responsibility for what we do, and we can't just say, yeah, we succeeded, so we're awesome, and then something goes wrong, and it's like, well, it's bad luck. No, it's all part of the package. What we want to do is sway the odds as far in our favor as we can, and go out there and have a kick-ass time with our friends, because that's what it's all about. I've been ice climbing now for literally 40 years, which seems insane, but I've loved pretty much almost all of it. It's been really, really great. And if anybody has any questions outside of this forum, please hit me with an email or a DM on any of the social media platforms, and I'm there. I owe a huge debt, as Doug said, to my mentors, and I really would like to talk with you, and I will respond and get in there. So that's all I got for you today. I hope that worked, and I'm out. But yeah. One last thing. There will be accidents, and as climbers, we tend to get really smug. Be like, those idiots, what are they doing? And it's like, that doesn't help move things forward. Nobody goes out the door in the morning and says, I'm going to have an accident. Like, these are smart, well-meaning people that, have accidents. I've had some, and I've had some while I'm guiding, and it's just, be kind. They're good people. They're like you and me. And we need to change our culture to do a better job of how we respond to accidents in our community. And just be kind, man. It's your buddy, whether they are or not. Maybe they didn't know as much as you do, but they're smart, well-meaning people doing their best. And yeah, in hindsight, you can take a blowtorch to any situation, but it doesn't help. Like, be there for each other, because we're all in this together. So now I'm really done. And
Thank you, Will. Thank you. Appreciate it, Will. Awesome. Okay, so again, one of the purposes of this event is to help support search and rescue. Sheriff, thank you. It's good to see you. So we've got some gear to help these guys get a little bit more set up. So we've, from Gravel and Liberty Mountain, we've got some ice screws, so you guys are going to have some resources there. Some V-threaders, so we're going to do some training with you guys and make sure you're dialed in when it comes to that. And then a emergency rappel kit as well. So thank you, really appreciate it, and thank you so much for being out there at Raven Falls and going through that. So.
we didn't even know we had ice climbing. How many people know that there's ice climbing in Duchesne? Yeah, we didn't. So it was kind of yeah, we are changing it, and we appreciate it. We were caught unaware, and it was a terrible thing to happen. But appreciate you guys for responding and giving us the help too, and Utah County and their team. It was great. So thank you. Thank you.
A big round of applause for search and rescue. These guys are all volunteers, and they really go out there and help us out when we get in trouble. We've got similar packages for a couple of the other counties as well. So if anybody's here from Sanpete County or Uinta County, I don't know if anybody here made it from them, come and see us. Awesome, yeah, back there, come on up, we'll get you taken care of. So, and we're going to be, again, working with these counties to really help them, get some good training and things like that. So, let's turn the time over now to our resident scientist, Jackson. I think a lot of the things Will talked about is going to segue really nicely into Jackson's presentation, give us some details. So,
well, thanks so much, Dustin. As we sort of said before, I'm a research associate at the University of Utah in the Department of Mechanical Engineering. My background's in atmospheric science. My work is building climate models usually, but for funsies this week I put together a model of how ice climbs break. So Will did an excellent job talking about the qualitative aspects of how we look at climbing ice and how we try to do it safely, avoid terrible accidents and those sorts of things. And now I'm going to hop into more of the physics of how this actually works. And it's really interesting to hear these discussions because, we build these intuitions over time as we get more experience to say, well, I'm not going to climb this, I'm going to climb that. And it's really cool, like hearing Dustin talk about Tuttle being like, I'm not feeling it. That takes years and years and years to figure out why you feel that way. And it's actually backed up considerably well by the data. So can we have the next slide? So I'm going to sort of walk through what the research says, what our experience says, and then what the geometry of different ice climbs say about what the likelihood of breaking is. So there's sort of, we were talking about this before, there's like 2 papers out there that talk about the tensile strength of ice. So what we're talking about is the sort of strength that we ask when we're buying a new rope of how strong it is when we pull it in tension, and how much pressure does it take to actually snap that thing. So when we're looking at ice climbs, we usually think of their compressive strength, like Will was talking about. They're either perched, or we talk about their tensile strength, where they're hanging. And the thing that we see is that typically, sorry, thanks for joining for the physics lecture, by the way, I appreciate it, and I hope you read the syllabus. So the thing that we tend to see is that the ice compressive strength tends to be much greater than that of the tensile strength. So this curve here, this straight line that's sloping downwards, is its compressive strength. So this is what we would expect. When we see climbs that are perched, you're not going to see them collapse. And then on the other hand, when you see ice tensile strength, we can see that we have much, much lower values here. And this is the question of, is that dagger going to hold when I pull onto it? And the thing that we can see, this other curve here, is its tensile strength. So we can see that when ice climbs are hanging, they're much, much, much weaker than if they're perched. And this is the thing that Will was talking about with when you see that crack at the top, but the climb hasn't collapsed. That's actually a really good thing because it's much stronger sitting in that position than if it were free hanging. Next slide, please. So then what experience says? So this is a photo of an accident that happened this spring. And one of the things that this shows us is that we see these seemingly perched columns. So this is what looks like a candle of ice, like the 5th pillar of, or the 5th pitch of Stairway. But it falls as though it's just a dagger. And what I'm calling these are slip out columns. And the reason for this is, well, for one, variable weather. So we see that accidents tend to happen in these conditions of very large temperature swings. So like Will was talking about, it doesn't get that cold here. But this accident in particular, we had a pretty rapid change in temperature at the time, and what that could allude to is an amount of water that's flowing underneath this route and actually undermining it. So this is sort of that example, is that we see that climbs that show gaps at the top but not at the bottom, they don't collapse. But we're trying to identify these climbs that are ticking time bombs that are actually undermined. Have the next slide. So then when we get into the geometry of it, we can see just from basic geometry that a cylindrical hanging column, so like one of these two examples on the right-hand side here, is actually 60% heavier than that of a dagger that's showing a conical shape. So you're hanging 60% more ice off of the same attachment point if you have one of these free hanging columns than you would if you had a dagger alone. And the question is this enough to cause the climb to become a hair trigger like we've seen in multiple accidents in Utah over the past few years? So this is getting into sort of the like grade 5 and 6 sort of climbs that we're talking about here. So this really gets down to a physics question of what is the ratio of the hanging mass to the attachment surface area. Because like the ideal ice climb is about that thick and it's about a mile of attachment, but we don't climb those sorts of things. So the thing that I did was I made a model that talks about 4 different cases. So a dagger like we're shown here, where the attachment is a 5-meter diameter circle. We have a column that has a 2.5 meter diameter circle. A cone, which is like the sort of thing that we'll see on like the donor sickle or up in Cody and these sorts of large columnar sort of shaped climbs. And then a column that represents that accident that I showed in the last slide. Go to the next. So here are the profiles, as I was saying. So the blue line here represents that dagger. So this is the top of the climb at 0. Here's the point of the icicle down here. These are the curves that are showing the actual diameter as it changes throughout. So as I said, with the blue, that's the dagger, which reduces to 0 over the length of it. You have a 3-meter diameter column. You have a cone, which is that snow cone at the base. And then you have a 1.5 meter diameter column as well. So these are the 4 cases that I simulated with my model. Can we go to the next one? So immediately the thing that we want to look at is, well, how much do these things weigh? Like, you know, I've had discussions with Dustin about this, and he was there at the rescue this spring, and you know, the conversation keeps going to, this thing was the size of a bus. Well, how much does a bus weigh? Well, like, probably like 10 tons. And sort of the thing I was saying to Dustin is like, it's like if you took a bus and filled it with concrete. That's how heavy these things are. So if you look, this is basically if you took a chainsaw and cut slices out of this and added them up as you went down the ice climb, that's what this is showing. So if we immediately look at the dagger profile, you can see what you would expect because the diameter shrinks as you go down. It shouldn't increase in weight very much as you go. But even so, a dagger that's 5 meters across the top, like we'll see on like Angel of Fear or Automatic Control Theory, it weighs 50 tons, and that's hanging from the rock. Then if we go up to these other columns, things that we usually consider extremely sturdy, like a 3-meter diameter column, you can see this thing weighs 110 tons. So that's how large these climbs are. So like I was saying about the weight of a school bus that you fill with concrete, these are very, very large. And as we've heard from 2 other speakers, if you put screws into these things where they're not well attached, they'll yank you down with them. So who moves next? So from that research that existed previously, these dashed lines are representing the pressure it takes to cause these things to fail. And the things that could cause this to fail are, you know, vibrations from your tool striking it, or you swing into it and that causes a fracture line around where your tool is. But basically what we're seeing here is if any of these situations, aside from the dagger situation, don't have support from underneath, they're ticking time bombs. So the thing that we're trying to identify is these situations where we have what look like stable ice climbs, but are in fact hanging. And this is exactly what Will was talking about, is, you know, we have a varying temperature regime here. So this lower line is the lowest strength it takes to break this if it were like 0 degrees Celsius out, so 32 degrees, like really warm. And then if we go down to minus 20, you can see that strength increases. But even so, basically all of these profiles increase past this trigger zone, where if you were to swing into it, this entire thing is going to go full catastrophic if it's not supported underneath. And here we go to the next. So there's some conclusions to come from this. So the good, you know, this reinforces the snow cone idea like Will was talking about, and we see in many guidebooks and those sorts of things, that when we see a climb that has detached, it's actually one of the more stable climbs out there, and it's actually released most of the stress into a compressive strength versus a tension strength. And in general, daggers that are uniform density and are well attached, obviously you can't test this, and this is what makes them very difficult to climb and assess, is they're actually less tenuous than a column that's cylindrical of the same shape and attachment point. The bad is that slip-out columns are highly temperature dependent, and that makes them very sensitive. And as with this accident in the spring, the thing that we've been trying to tease out is whether it's the vibrations or some sort of propagating crack from the ice tool that actually swung into it, because when the accident occurred, the tool that was up there was actually above the crack in the ice climb. So we think that the vibrations alone were enough to cause this ice climb to trigger and fall out because it wasn't attached at the base in any way. So the unfortunate thing is identifying these slip-out columns is extremely difficult because it looks like an attached column but is not in fact attached. And the way that we can really tease these out is, for one, like the fifth pitch of Stairway, we saw that there's no snow cone there because the attachment points are extremely tenuous and there's a lot of water flowing through that area. So trying to identify the things that actually are supporting the climbs we're getting on is really important, because these slip-out columns are actually of the most dense ratios of ice to liquid water. So that makes them heavier than daggers of the equivalent size or fully formed frozen columns. So just sort of getting into the physics of how this stuff works. So happy to take any questions. Yeah, so the idea of a slip-out column here is you have a cave, and typically these caves will have a sloping surface beneath them, and the column will be forming from above in some notch or an overflow of water. And you'll be forming a dagger, and it eventually touches and starts to build in diameter close to the base. However, weather conditions or just, water courses will change the formation regime so that there isn't actually any attachment between the base of the ice climb and the ground, even though it'll look like a fully formed column. And the thing that happens is, as you climb up the column, you're getting closer and closer to this trigger zone where you're actually exceeding the pressure it takes to snap the ice. And as soon as you swing your ice tool in, it causes the whole thing to go. Yeah. Any other? Yeah.
Does the snow cone actually provide support, or is that just an indicator that it's not slip-out?
It's both. So, in Cody we see these form up a lot where they'll be like 15 feet to 25 feet across, and it's basically just sitting like, a dreidel, and it's sitting on its top. It's like, it's not in any unstable fashion because it's totally supported underneath like a pyramid.
I'll just add a couple real life things. So I would say in the 80s and 90s, people climbed a lot of pillars, and for whatever reason, I got really risk adverse to them. And so I started putting bolts in behind the pillars and doing harder climbing because I thought it was a lot safer. So on the fifth pitch of Stairway, there's a mixed climb that I've done 100 times because a lot of times I get up there and I don't like the pillar, so I'm climbing thin ice with bolts protecting it. And really, Alex Lowe was one of the first guys to go up and say, hey, if this thing breaks, I'm gonna put a bolt in behind it, so when that thing falls away, the slip out thing, or a dagger that cracks, you swing into the wall and the pillar goes down the root. So I would say, as a general rule, and Jackson, you can hit this more, but when I assess these, I always think of them as like totem poles, if that makes sense. Like if this thing is super bomber and it can stand on its own, and you can literally go up and hit the thing super hard at the base, then it's pretty solid. But to your point, like if it's a snow cone and it's just snow cone around it, that thing may not be like attached at the bottom, and it's, to your point, Jackson, it's hanging. So there was a big wave of roots that were put up with bolts behind the pillars to protect them if they did break. I don't ever advise anyone trying to climb a pillar that they think might break, but in the early 2000s, we chose to climb a lot of that stuff, and honestly, we broke a lot of pillars, but we had bolts behind them. So it does work, but it's still kind of sketchy.
Yeah, I think it's important to differentiate between sort of the formation cone from ice spray that forms high density ice, and a snow cone that's caused by ice and snow that's falling down over the top of the route and depositing around the base. So it's usually easy to tell the difference between those things, but you know, as Will was saying with bringing avalanche gear with you, you should have a probe with you, and being able to probe the bottom of these things to see the density of the cones is pretty important for identifying that.
This sounds counterintuitive, but I found less ice the better because they don't fail catastrophically. Does that make sense? Like I prefer to climb thinner, harder stuff that may be more physically challenging than climbing something that potentially could catastrophically fail. And I think that's something to think about when you're out there. Because is there a line that is maybe more difficult that has less ice on it, but you don't have to worry about a catastrophic failure?
Yeah, and the data backs that up. I mean, basically what we're showing here is that daggers given the same geometry of a column of the same attachment, they're going to be stronger just because there's less ice hanging from the same area.
I would say the last comment before ice climbing's awesome, right? So we don't want to scare the shit out of you guys, right? But it's an amazing sport. It takes you to incredible architecture that you would never see, and we're just trying, again, the whole point of this is just to try to have a little bit of education, just because you just have to be aware of some things. And to be honest, I lived through this stuff by breaking pillars and doing a bunch of stupid shit and survived. But we're just trying to pass that information down to you guys.
So, yeah, well, thanks so much for listening.
Thank you, Jackson. And just so you guys know, we will do a Q&A, you know, at the end of this as well. So if there's more questions for any of the panelists, we'll do that. So thank you guys all for being here and being patient with us. I really appreciate the size of this group. This is great. So we're going to turn the time over now to Jeff Rose. Jeff Rose is on Utah County Search and Rescue. He's on what's the name of it technically? First team or. He's on their elite climbing team, so he's one of the guys that's going to actually come and be first on scene if there are some of these climbing accidents. And he's he's been on a few of these rescues that I've been on and been part of that training. So Jeff's a great guy. So give him a round of applause.
Thanks for putting this all together. There's way better climbers out there than me, so I don't want you to think that I'm like any elite climber or anything like that. What I wanted to do tonight is, one, be available to answer questions that you might have, kind of familiarize you with how we work as a search and rescue organization, but really, more than anything, talk through some tenets that I hold near and dear when it comes to ice climbing and just safety in the outdoors, and talk through just some thoughts that we as a group kind of chatted through when we were trying to get this organized. So first off, you cannot eliminate risk, right? You can't eliminate risk in this sport. It's not going to happen. As much as people might say, like, oh, you can avoid the risk. You can avoid the risk. You can stay home, right? But you're not going to eliminate that risk. You can only mitigate it, right? You can make smart decisions. It comes with, as Doug and others have talked about, it comes with a lifetime of gaining knowledge. That your lifetime might be a year in the sport. Your lifetime might be 40 years in the sport, right? But you have to gain that knowledge. And you can never escape that risk, right? Once you put yourself in harm's way, there's no escaping it, right? So that's just kind of how it is. So I've included a few pictures to kind of give you an idea. This might not make sense at all. If you know the area, this is Stairway. So what you see at the very top is the apron. This is a picture, like wide view, from the simulated rescue that we ran last year with Utah County, Salt Lake County, and some others that joined in. So what you see here is we've got a patient at the top, right? We have to get them down to the base of the climb, and then get them down to the path, get them down to an ambulance, helicopters are nice, lift them off, right? So the reason I include this is just to kind of give you an idea of the situation, right? I want you to kind of keep this in mind. Maybe think about it a little bit differently than you would have when you're saying, hey, I'm going out and climbing. Think about what if it hits the fan, right? What do I have to do? So there's going to be a lot of people up there. There's going to be a lot of climbers, potentially, other climbers. There's going to be rescue folks. There's going to be people that there's going to be a ton of people around, right? So one of the things that I want to also reiterate that Dustin and I were talking about before is we want you to understand we do this because we choose to. We want to be there. Please don't feel like you can't call us, right? You dial 911, we show up, right? Another thought is financial impact, right? Some people won't call because they're afraid, or some people, once the rescue comes, they say, oh, don't bring the helicopter because I can't afford it, right? I'll kind of give you some insight into how we work. We never charge, right? Utah County Search and Rescue doesn't charge. I don't think Salt Lake County charges. No search and rescue will charge you for the rescue. If you do incur a bill, it's usually going to be hospital bills, which if you're hurt, you're going to the hospital. You're not going to avoid those anyway, right? You're not just going to be like, I'll just go home and mend to my broken femur, right? So don't hesitate to call us. We want to come out and get you. Don't get me wrong, I hope I never see you with this jacket on, but if I do, I'm glad that I'm there because I want to be able to help out. So a couple of other things. Couple rules that I use. I've always been, when you're climbing, you're going to be in at least a party of 2, unless you're soloing, go for it, whatever. But I use the rule 2 for go, 1 for no, right? Both me and my partner have to decide we're going to climb, right? But all it takes is one person, me or my partner, to say, you know what, I don't feel comfortable with this. You could use the same rule in groups of 3, 4, whatever, right? Listen to the people around you. Just like Dustin was saying, he's out there looking at Matt, and one of the things he was looking at is how Matt was reacting to that 5th pitch of pillar, or 5th pitch of stairway. It's worthwhile to be very aware of your surroundings, the people around you, what's going on. And that kind of brings me to the next point, which is know your abilities, right? You have to be very aware and humble while at the same time stupid enough to get on ice, because what we do is kind of wild. Know your abilities, but also know your surroundings. Ice climbing safety extends to way more than just looking at the pillar in front of you. You need to be aware of the avalanche conditions, be aware of the temperature, having watched the forecast for the entire season, the run.
If you're not going to help, go away. We want you there as a community. We want you all to take on a role. If you're up there, you're with the climbing party, you just saw what happened, whatever it is, please be willing to be put to work, right? We can't do what we do on our own in the same way that we can with the community around us. So first off, what happens when, I think there might be another slide, go one more. Okay, yeah, so what happens when an accident occurs? First thing, I take this from a friend of mine who wrote a cool blog on it. I'll find it if you want to read it. But he uses the phrase, smoke a mental cigarette. Take a beat. Think about it. Don't panic. React in the way that you can, that you've been trained in whatever training you have, right? Don't do anything to make the situation worse. It's going to be a high adrenaline moment, but you can always do something to help the situation. So assess the situation. First off, what's going on? Do you have a partner that's unconscious, hanging on a rope that you were top roping him up? He's, 50 feet below you. What do? Do you know how to lower him down, lock him off so he's down on a stable surface, and you can then rappel down to him and try and help out? Do you raise them up? What do you do? So just think through the process and figure out, okay, what am I going to do? But once you've taken that moment, if you assess that, hey, we're going to need help, call us, right? As soon as you can, get us on the phone so that way we can start making our way to you and start making a plan. Think about the kit that you carry. So Will shared some things about how early on in his career, he didn't carry Abby gear. I'm a strong proponent of Abby gear. When I go climbing, anybody that I climb with, they're going to have a beacon, a shovel, a probe. One, because if Abby comes down and they're safe, I want them to come get me. But 2, I want to be able to find them, right? Will mentioned Reco. not to be too morbid, right? But we don't want to waste time finding dead bodies. We want to find live bodies and recover ones that we can, right? So Reco is a huge favor to us. It allows us to do things in a much more efficient way. So at the very least, if you're not going to carry a beacon, get a jacket with Reco in it. Get a Reco tag that you can put in your pocket. Super, super helpful. And then communication, right? When we make a plan to go climb, we should know the area, right? At least do your study on like the surrounding climbs, even if you're following, right? If you're going out for your first ice climb and you're like, oh, my buddies are taking me climbing, where are you going? Oh, I don't know, I'll just show up to the parking lot and like hope for the best. At least like talk to them about, hey, where are we? What is this climb called? What's the area called? So that way, if something happens, you call 911, you can say, hey, we're on this climb. And then, you know, dispatch might not know what you're talking about, but when they relay that information to us, we know, oh, finger of fate. I know exactly where that is. I know there's 2 approaches. I know this, that, and the other thing, right? If it's just, hey, I'm at Bridal Veil, we go looking up at the apron, we can't find you, and now 2 hours later, it's like, well, your cell phone died and we had to like search everywhere to find you. That makes it a little bit harder. So know some information to pass along. And then gear. Make sure you can stay warm. You know, there's some alpine purists out there. It's like, hey, let's go light and fast. I'm not even taking water with me. Like, I'm just going to try and, you know, pound this thing out as quick as I can. Make sure that you're prepared. Bring something to stay warm. Bring some food. Bring some water. I'm not saying, like, you have to survive on the mountain for a day. You don't have to bring a full bivvy, like, you know, but bring the gear that you need. And think about what could happen and try and be able to be prepared to help out in some way. Help yourself, right? Hope is not a good action plan. Be prepared to self-rescue. If you're prepared to self-rescue and you still have to call us, odds are it's going to go way smoother, right? You're going to be a little bit prepared. We're going to be able to help you out. And then I think the last thing is be willing and able to be adaptable, right? Put on your MacGyver hat, figure things out, try and do the best that you can while you're waiting for us. And that adaptability also extends to, hey, when we show up, if we ask you to hold an IV bag, please be willing to hold an IV bag, right? If we ask you to run down to the parking lot, not run, walk, do so safely, whatever, to carry this piece of gear or to help in some way, please be willing to do it. We're all part of a community. It's not a moment for hubris, right? That time is past. We're here to help. We're here to save lives. So that's kind of the general thoughts that I had. I think that's the last picture. We work with a lot of really cool resources. If you go back a couple of pictures, you'll notice that the guy in blue, so he's one of the tactical flight officers from DPS, right? We work with DPS, we work with Lifelight, we work with ambulance agencies, we work with the sheriff's office, we work with all of these amazing people who are around to help you in your time of need. I guess the only thing that I would say, and it's not like an issue, we've never run into it, but like support the community in the way that you can. Thank yous are nice. We don't need them, but they're nice. So anything that you can do to keep accidents from happening, awesome. Anything you can do to make the rescue go smoother, great. And get out there, climb some fun stuff, be safe, wear a helmet, all the good things.
Awesome.
Thank you, Jeff. Really appreciate that perspective. A couple things to note in terms of like timing. So I was called to go on 2 rescues, not because I'm on search and rescue, that's those guys' job. I just was reached out to because, as a climbing community, a lot of times, we get in places where, we have a lot of friends and resources, and so typically we call each other in a lot of cases. So when Tim fell in Provo Canyon, I got called. I was in Orem. I wasn't the first on scene. There were some other climbers up there that were able to reach him first. Tuttle was in the canyon as well. I called him, and we got there about the same time. Search and rescue actually got to the scene faster than I expected, but it was still probably a couple of hours before we actually got to where we could move Tim out of there. And once we did, it was very, very fast. They were very efficient. And the really beautiful thing is using that DPS helicopter is phenomenal. So definitely don't shy away from using the helicopter. Really glad we had that, because that wouldn't have been fun to carry Tim down the gully. Tim, come up.
The helicopter, they don't make you pay for.
They don't make you pay for the helicopter, which is nice. You do have to pay for the ambulance, however. But big thanks to the community. One thing I did want to mention is, in regards to being afraid for bills and whatnot, we raised almost the exact amount to the dollar in GoFundMe money as my medical bills cost. So thank you for all of you that donated and came and helped out with my rescue, and thank you, Colton, for being a solid climbing partner and getting Dustin and everyone up there to help me. Couple things that I just wanted to note are, going along with what Doug Heinrich said and Will Gadd, a lot of times we look at these climbs, we get in these situations, and we know, eventually you climb ice 3 times a week, 4 times a week in the winter. You're going to be there when something happens to you or something happens to someone that you're with. You can't necessarily avoid it, but you can do your best. And there's going to be good things and bad things in all these situations. For me, something that I did that I am very grateful for is I had been reading a lot of Will Gadd articles on safety, especially last season, because now I'm a dad, so all of a sudden, you go into dad mode and, have to back up your rappels and do all these things that you never thought of doing before. But I had stepped off of the pillar on Finger of Fate to rest, and then I got back on and started to climb. But, I had the thought, well, shoot, I was on a perfect rest, why not put in a screw? So I stepped back onto the rest, reached as high as I could, put in a screw. Something you're never really reaching high to put in a screw, but I thought, okay, I've got this perfect ledge, reach as high as I can, put in a screw, and that was the screw that held, and if I hadn't put that screw in, I probably would have decked and died, realistically. Which is, not the most fun thing to think about, but at the same time, the climbing had been really easy up until that part. The part where I fell was even easier. It wasn't the physical aspect of the climbing, it was the ice and my decision to get on it that day. So I just want to be, an example to other people. It's like, don't be afraid to place screws. I know some people, like Dustin, don't like to place a lot of screws because you're comfortable. You get into a position where it's like, I've done this a million times. We all say free solo mentality when you're up leading ice, and I think that's a great mentality to have. And then you put the screws in for when, shit hits the fan and you're not really prepared for it. But yeah, that's kind of all I got, so don't fall.
Thanks, Tim. One other thing real quick on timing and the importance of communication and having an inReach. So the incident out at Raven Falls, there were 3 climbers, and they did not have an inReach with them, I believe. So that's an important thing. There's the midnight ride we all went on a few years ago also could have been prevented with an inReach. So the important thing is have comms and take it with you and make sure that you have it. And maybe put it in a place that it's going to be safe as well, so that it's not going to get buried or something along those lines in case things go south. So, but from a time standpoint, Raven Falls, so I got called about 12:30. It took us probably about 2 hours to get there. Probably about 2 hours for me and Matt to actually reach Sean. And then it was, it took Anya 2 hours to get down. So Anya was able to get down and drive to Duchesne so she could get service. So that's the point I'm trying to make is if there was an inReach there, that would have shaved off about 2 hours from that, from that rescue. And Sean was quite cold at that point. So it was a 4-hour approach to get to Sean where it could have been 2 hours had they had an inReach. So, again, that's just another really important thing. And, I'm really glad that we're all here to have these discussions, and we want to approach this as a discussion rather than, pointing fingers or finding fault or blame or any of those types of things. It's really, important to have these kinds of conversations, even though sometimes they may be hard, just to try to help everybody here stay safe. So, but again, we're all lovers of the sport and ice climbing, and I encourage everybody to get out there. I just want to make sure that we take maybe a little bit of a deeper look and a safer approach to it. So thanks to the panel, really appreciate this. We've got some prizes, some raffle prizes we're going to do, but so while you guys are getting ready, I want to just have an opportunity for any questions. So you can ask questions of any of the panelists. I'm not sure if Will's still with us or not, but if you've got questions, let's fire those off and then we'll give away some prizes. Anybody? Okay.
So I hear a lot of chatter. People are asking about, hey, I'm new to climbing. How long before I can... Yeah, so people ask, how long should I be top roping and following before I start leading? So I'm curious to hear the panel's opinion on that one.
I like Doug's approach, which is following a shit ton of ice, before you really start leading. I think I started leading my first season, and I look back at that and look at that as a situation of, do as I say, not as I do, because I think that, again, having 5 seasons of following, especially hard climbers is really, really good. I know when I kind of got out of shape for a little bit, and when I got back in shape and kind of, went into climbing a lot more, I climbed a lot with Matt Tuttle and followed him on a lot of really hard ice, and that really helped me progress significantly, and so I think that's very important. But
yeah, so maybe not an answer, but a method to kind of figure that out for yourself. How will you know if you feel comfortable leading ice? Being like Will said, if you can't look at something from the bottom and say, I can climb that without falling, should you be leading it? Should you be climbing it at all, right? And how can you get to that point without having climbed a ton of ice? And you don't have to just start leading. You can mock lead, right? Be on top rope, start practicing setting screws, figure out, hey, this is the right way to set screws. I get super tired when I'm setting screws. I need to change my technique, all of those things. So it is a progression. It's not like one day you say, oh, I'm gonna start leading. I think similar to Dustin, I started leading my first season, but I look back at that and say, like, hey, there's way more that I could have done in order to feel super comfortable at that point. Probably wait a little while longer, but yeah, there's some thoughts.
To add to that, I think 2 important things. First being, if you're starting to lead ice, especially we see so many people transitioning from rock climbing, like every 13-year-old in this gym is stronger than me, right? That doesn't mean they should be going and leading grade 4 ice or 5 ice, right? Just because you could physically get to the top doesn't mean that you know how ice acts underneath picks and crampons, right? If you're going and you're trusting dinner plates that you shouldn't, stuff like that. So realistically, it should be a lot to where not that you're not going to fall off because you're pumped, but because you're not going to do something stupid and make the ice deteriorate under you. That would be comment 1. Number 2, years and years ago, Jen and Darren at Mountain Works, they taught me a really good way for learning to be comfortable leading. Go set up a top rope on something steep, even if you're just out, yourself with a micro traction or something, and take a couple screws. Go a body length, put a screw in with your left hand, take it out, clip it, switch, right hand, take it out, clip it, body length. Just keep doing that because you're going to gain that muscle memory. You're going to understand how the pump works and doesn't work when you're ice climbing. It's very, very different than just clipping a draw and being done and moving on. Especially when you get to steeper ice or more brittle ice. You want to just make sure that you don't get in a situation where you're 10, 12 feet above your last screw and you're all of a sudden pumped out of your mind because you realize, oh, I've only learned how to place screws with my right hand and now I can't place with my left hand. that's something where I did that early on, and it was like the biggest, help, because then you get into a situation and you know that, okay, the ice is safe, I'm going to be able to place screws. If I get to a situation that I feel like I'm going to, be too pumped to finish or whatever, you can down climb to your last screw or, something before you take a big whipper. So.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, like, when I did start leading, I led a lot of WI3s. I didn't lead a 5 for quite some time and really kind of built out that foundation. And it's, because, wanted to really kind of do that safely and really take what this guy said to heart. So, okay, so want to let everybody know, we are going to do, we've got refreshments. So again, in the yoga room back here, so we're going to move in there here in a minute. So if anybody has additional questions or things like that you want to ask us, I'm sure, are you guys, able to be in there? Yeah, I'll be in there. And, feel free to have whatever kind of discussion and ask more questions, that may come up. So again, thank you all very much for being here, and we're going to raffle some stuff away. So